Okay, everybody, I am sharing my screen. Can everybody see it? Let me make sure I can see chat. Let's see. Okay, so if you can hear me, can you just send me a quick chat so I can see who you are and just verify you can hear me okay? I know we have an Andrew with us. Hi, Andrew. And we might have some others as well. I'm showing a much higher count. Alfredo, thank you. That's great. Andrew, thank you for that. So it would seem that technologically we are good to go. So the session that we're going to do here is we're going to talk a little bit about the PMP and why it's important, and share a little bit about project management basics, kind of get you launched on your effort to get your PMP. And then, of course, if you have any questions, we can answer those as well. So we've got a slide here that shows you the growth of the PMP certification. And it's been one of the top 10 professional certifications for many years now. In fact, I just did a search yesterday and it still shows up in the top 10. And I don't know if you're interested or not, but I got my PMP in 2004. So like early 2004. So I'm like somewhere right here in the first 100,000 people that got their PMP. And then, of course, it's kind of exploded since then. So the credential itself is great for assisting people in anything that has to do with advancing your career. Like if you just need to update your resume, you can do that. There are studies that PMI, that's the Project Management Institute, which is the entity that offers the PMP certification, where they demonstrate that certified project managers make significantly more than their uncertified colleagues. So when I was back in 2004, I was a divorced single dad. I'd had custody of my two boys. They were 8 and 10, and then about 5 years goes by, and so they're 13 and 15, and we decide they're going to go live with their mom, and all of a sudden I had all this time on my hands. And I had a friend of mine who said, Jeff, you ought to go get your PMP certification. And I said, I don't even know what that is. And so he told me a little bit about it, and I looked into it, and I realized that I had been doing project management for a long time, kind of like an accidental project manager. So I don't know if that's happened to you or not, or if you know somebody, but I realized that, oh my gosh, there's this whole giant body of knowledge of good practices that you can use to actually run projects. And we all want to do projects, right? Maybe we don't think of them as projects, but project management is the science of getting stuff done and learning how to get stuff done, whether it's part of your career or otherwise, is a great thing. Now, also, once you get your PMP or even just join PMI, you have some networking possibilities that didn't exist before. Almost every relatively large metropolitan area has got a chapter of PMI. So I live in Utah. I live in sort of the Salt Lake area, and every month PMI has a luncheon with a speaker. And they always have some networking activities. The speakers are always relevant. And so it's a great way to network and stay connected with people who are also active in project management. Of course, getting your project management professional certification and the effort that it takes to do that is going to teach you a lot. You're going to gain a lot of knowledge. You'll understand what the best practices are, and then you'll be able to leverage that in your career. You know, the same man that told me to go get my PMP, about 3 years later, I'd gotten my PMP, and I was actually doing trainings for getting your PMP. And he called me up and he says, "Jeff, I've got to get my PMP." And I said, "I didn't even know you didn't have it." And he said, "Well, look, I've just gotten remarried," which I had known, and he'd taken on some stepkids, and he says, "I don't have enough money to really support my family, and I've got to do something to improve my career." And I said, "Okay, well, so I'm doing a class out in Texas in a couple of weeks. Why don't you come?" And so he did. He came and he went through the exam prep course, and he took the exam and he passed. And then he did something really smart. He just sent out an email to his colleagues, including his superiors, that basically just said, "Hey, I just want to let you know that I just recently took the examination for PMP and passed." And just by doing that, 2 weeks later, he was assigned to a sensitive Department of Defense contract project and got a significant increase just because he got the PMP and he promoted himself a little bit. So just getting your PMP is great, you know, and you'll want to add it to your signature on your emails. And, you know, if you're still doing business cards, you can add it to that. But you want to use it to promote yourself a little bit. Not an in-your-face way, but just a, you know, hey, just letting you know that, you know, got my PMP. It was a wonderful journey. I learned a ton. If you'd like to know anything, let me know. So the fact that you're even on this call probably means you've done some of that thinking, and you're you know, you believe that the PMP is going to do you some good. So not only does it help you become a better project manager, but it also is very important in helping you with your career. Somebody want to say something? Oh, thought I heard somebody. Okay, so now here's the thing too is there's, you know, 1 million PMPs, which makes it clear to those that are in project management that it's one of those certifications that you need to have. So by going through a PMP exam prep course, not only do you learn the best practices of you know, project management, but it helps enable you to pass the exam. And I'll talk about the exam in just a minute. I showed this screen too, and this is about where we had our technical problems, but this chart shows what the job demand for project management is across the world looking forward into next year. So there are significant numbers of project management jobs that are created that are needing to be filled right now. And many of those jobs are going to require PMPs, or even if they don't require it, it's one of those differentiators that will help a candidate get the job over an uncertified colleague. And not only that, PMI does these studies. And remember, PMI is the Project Management Institute. They're the entity that gives the PMP. They do these studies, and it's usually 15 to 20% difference between certified project managers and uncertified project managers. So if for no other reason you want to stay where you're with the company that you're at, and you just want to improve your career and opportunities for higher income, the PMP is the way to go. Like my friend that I told you about, the one who first told me to go get my PMP, and I followed his advice, and then later he says, I need to get my PMP. And so he did that, and then that resulted in a promotion and a raise just because he promoted himself a little bit. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about me. So I've been asked to just share a bit. I've been doing project management trainings for 15 years now. I've had over 6,000 people go through my trainings to get certified, and I've conducted over 300 trainings over the years. And I have a very high pass rate, which is because I'm actually like you. I'm a project manager and I do it. I have projects I'm working on right now, and I'm not just one of these, hey, in theory, here's what you do. So I know how to answer questions. I know how to help folks get ready for the exam. And over the years, I have been a project manager for Compaq and HP. I was vice president of a company called LegalNet Inc. I was the executive director of a state of California commission. It was on the bicentennial celebration of the Constitution. As the director, California director of the National Center for Constitutional Studies, and then I'm an independent business owner. And so you can see that, you know, when it comes to my background, I have experience in the business sector, the public sector, and even as an entrepreneur. And the scope of the PMP exam is not just, you know, for big projects. The project management professional certification is for anybody that runs projects. And I've had many people in my trainings who were just getting ready to start their own business. Retail stores. I remember one guy who was getting ready to open a restaurant, and they're there to learn how best to do project management. The certifications that I have include the PMP, as well as Agile Certified Practitioner, Risk Management Professional, and Agile Scrum Master. And on a more fun note, my most important project is family. And I've got 6 kids, I've got 8 grandkids, and 1 great-grandchild. And that project is an ongoing project for me. So let's just shift gears and let's have a little bit of fun just doing a little bit of training right now, just so you kind of get an idea about some of the basics. And this is stuff that you will need to know when you take your PMP exam. So first of all, let's just talk about what the definition of a project is. So a project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. So if we expand on that to make sure that we're clear, we would say that projects are endeavors that are done by people. They're going to be constrained by limited resources, meaning projects will have a schedule and a budget, and often even the scope itself is constrained. Projects are done once and then they're finished. So they're not ongoing, repeating things. And when we do a project, they are planned and then they are done, they're executed. And while the project is underway, it's monitored and controlled. And because it creates something unique, it's temporary in nature, meaning there's a definite beginning and a definite end. What projects are not is they're not operations. So operations are those things that are ongoing and are repetitive. And projects can have some repetitive elements, but just because there are some repetitive elements, it doesn't change the fact that the outcome of a project is going to be unique. So it's also helpful for the exam to kind of understand some more characteristics of a project. So like we were just saying, it has a definite beginning and a definite end. They can be very short or they can be very long. I was in a training once, and there was a lady in this class, and we were in the section of the training where we were doing planning for the schedule and the budget and things like that. And she said, I'm on a project where we expect just the planning portion, meaning before any work gets executed, was going to take 2 to 2.5 years. So it was a massive project, obviously, but projects, so like we were saying before, can be very short or very long. They can result in something very small or something very large. So the size and the duration of a project is not something that, you know, contributes to whether something's considered a project or not. Projects are complete when the objectives have been met, or it's determined that they cannot be met and the project is canceled. Sometimes projects lose funding or they run out of money. That would be, you know, another reason why goals could not be achieved and it might need to be canceled. There could also be a reason like maybe laws have changed or the marketplace has changed and it makes no sense to continue the project. So projects are done when their objectives are met or when it no longer makes sense to continue the project. And projects, you know, we were talking about different kinds of things. A project could be developing a new charger for a cell phone. It could be expanding the service that's offered by a consulting company. It could be the effort to merge two companies. It could be the creation and implementation of a new accounting system. It could be renovating corporate office space or developing research around a particular political issue. Performing a study on the environmental impact of a bridge that might be built in a rural area. Could be, oh, I got a duplicate there, but here's my favorite one right here. It could be bake a cake. Bake a cake is a project, right? Has a definite beginning and end and results in something unique. Project drivers, so organizations do projects for different reasons. Usually they can be reduced to financial incentives, right? Entities exist to make money. Generally speaking. And so you can have stakeholders that have a request or a need, which usually gets tied back to some kind of strategic part of the business, and it's going to result in some more income or cost savings, which results in, you know, more profit. But stakeholders would be, in this particular case, folks like senior management, maybe board of directors folks, or maybe you know, the higher ups in the company that are working on implementing strategy that the board created. There could be a reason to implement some kind of change when it comes to the technological capabilities of a company. And again, that would probably be to deliver more efficiently to customers, and that would contribute to more sales and or more efficient operations, which would result in higher profits. Could be to improve or fix products, processes or services, and then we've got a fourth one here, and it could be that there's some new laws or regulations that have to be complied with, and that could drive the creation of a new project. Now, projects exist in different environments. If we were baking a cake, our project would largely be in a kitchen, right? If our project is to put a man on Mars, the environment is not only going to be much larger, but it's going to be have different aspects to it. There's going to be parts of the environment that have to do with research and development and testing and things like that. And if you think about project environment from an organizational point of view, It usually breaks down like this, where you have portfolios that are at the highest strategic level of the company. Portfolios would be where you group projects and programs together in order to advance the strategic objectives of the organization. And the next level down would be programs, and programs are then groups of related projects that are managed together so that you can achieve efficiencies and meet objectives that will result in benefits that you would not be able to get if you ran the projects individually. And then you have projects, which is what we've just been talking about, which is that temporary endeavor to create something. Now, when you take your exam, your test will be on projects. So there may be some references to programs on portfolios, and you're not expected to know details about those, maybe definitionally. So you remember that programs are a group of related projects and portfolios are groups of programs and projects that are related in some kind of strategic way. And then we kind of covered this already just when I was talking through that last slide, but this kind of gives us a visual representation. So if you have a portfolio, you can see that there could be sub-portfolios, programs, and projects in it. And when you go down to the next level, there will be programs and projects and possibly other work that are part of the portfolio. And then when you get down to the next level, you will see that what you have are projects and necessary other work like operations or facilities and things like that. But when you get down to this level here, it's all about projects. And the project could belong to a program or it could be a standalone project. Now, projects have different life cycles. And in fact, as the profession has progressed and has developed more and more best practices, how you run a project has become a consideration at the front end of a project. So it used to be that there was kind of one way of doing projects. We call it traditional project management or waterfall project management. And then as technology improved and became present, you started having projects to build software, for example, and the traditional way of doing projects ended up not being as well suited for those kinds of projects. And so this chart right here kind of shows you what the landscape is when it comes to types of projects. So notice that the vertical axis has to do with requirements for the project. If there's little uncertainty, meaning we know what the requirements are, either upfront or they're easily discoverable, we're going to be in that lower end there that we have labeled simple. And then the other dimension is the horizontal axis, and that has to do with the solution. Do we know how we're going to actually deliver the requirements? And again, if we know how to do it and or it's easily discoverable, that's going to put us in that lower left quadrant. Now, as uncertainty in both the requirements and the solution increase, the project becomes more complicated and complex, and it makes sense to manage a project with agile techniques or some agile techniques as opposed to waterfall. So take an example of building a building. If you're going to build a building, you need to know what the whole building is going to look like from the bottom to the roof before you start digging the foundation, right? Because the foundation and how big it is, how sturdy it has to be, all of those kinds of things have to be figured out based on what the building is going to look like. So traditional project management will have a big upfront planning effort. And it makes sense because you need to have it. If you're developing some software, you may not even know what the code is. And usually you don't. I mean, I know there's snippets out there of code and there's ways to piece existing code together, but we usually don't know what the code's going to look like on the front end. We don't even know what the specs should be, other than we want to create a software application that does one thing or another. And then once we get into the project, we learn things about it and we need to do replanning over and over again. And so that is where you have kind of the sweet spot for agile run projects. So there's two basic approaches. You have the waterfall approach and you have the agile approach. And depending on the project, excuse me, good project managers need to understand this chart here so they can know which is the best way to manage the project. Now, we can even break it down into some more granular levels. So if you look at that top row, when we talk about predictive, that's the more traditional waterfall approach. We know what the requirements are. The activities need to be performed once for the entire project. And when the project is done, you deliver it. And the primary goal in these kinds of projects is to manage to cost. Manage to schedule is also relevant there, but cost is the main driver or the main metric that is looked at when it comes to the predictive approach. Then you've got the iterative approach. Now this is where the requirements are changing. They evolve over time, and you do the activities of the project over and over until you get it right. You write code, you test it, doesn't pass. You write more code, you test, it doesn't pass. So you keep repeating it until you get it right, and then you have the finished product and you deliver it in a single delivery. And your main metric for this is to deliver what the customer wants, to deliver the correct solution. Then there is an incremental approach, and again, the requirements are dynamic, meaning we don't know, we don't have clarity on them at the front end. And then when it comes to the activities, we do the activities once, but we do it for a relatively short increment. Typically in project management, when we're talking about increments, we're talking about 2 weeks to 4 weeks. And we're also delivering value based on each increment. So rather than a single delivery at the end of the project, we're giving or releasing to the customer, the end user, value incrementally as we go through the project. And one of the primary goals for this approach is speed. Get it done fast. And then we talked about agile, and agile is dynamic requirements. We repeat until we get it correct, and we also deliver in small increments. And the goal here is to satisfy the customer on an ongoing basis, excuse me, and let the customer derive value from the project even before it's over. So maybe it's helpful to kind of summarize this. So you have predictive life cycles, which are where we're going to leverage what we know and what's been proven. Low uncertainty, low complexity, and we can segment the project into some sequential phases and manage it as a whole and deliver the overall deliverable at the end. So we said iterative life cycles is where we improve and modify partially completed work by feedback until we get it right. And then we deliver it to the customer. So the incremental life cycle, like we said, is we finished pieces of the project in separate deliverables that potentially can be used and drive revenue from the incrementally as we go through the project. And then agile is really a blend of iterative and incremental together. So if we were to give you a visual here, here's what a single phase project would look like. And you'll notice that there are 5 elements here to managing the project. There's initiating, there is planning, there is executing, and there's closing. And while all that activity is going on, there's monitoring and controlling. So this is on the test. These are called process groups or project management phases. And it's simple, right? You start a project, you do your planning, you do the work. Sometimes the work results in further planning. And when we're finished and we get acceptance from the customer, we close the project. And while the work is being done, we monitor it. And if there are gaps in the performance, then we exert control over the project to bring it back in line. Now, a project can be chunked up into phases. Like if we were building a boat, maybe the first phase is design the boat, the second phase is to build the boat, and the third phase is to deliver the boat. In PMI's world, for each phase, you do all 5 of those process groups. So in closing, in the first graphic there, we're not closing the project, we're closing the phase, and then we start the next phase. And we're finished that, we close it, and then we go on to the next phase until we have finished the whole project. It is possible to have overlapping phases, meaning that a subsequent phase can begin before the previous one has been fully completed. And as you go through a project, there are what we call phase gates. And these are points in time when the stakeholders, along with the team, examine the project and determine whether or not the project should go forward. And so after we've started the project and we've done some feasibility studies, etc., then the question is, should we go ahead and charter a project, get the project manager involved and authorized, and then you go into planning, and as you're doing planning, do we have enough money? Do we have enough time? You know, whatever those questions are, you ask those questions, and it's possible that it's at those junctures that we might decide to end the project. Now, PMI, the Project Management Institute, has what's called the Standard for Project Management. It's actually an ANSI standard. And the ANSI standard is included in a book called the PMBOK, the Project Management, a Guide to the Project Management Body of Knowledge. It has a lot more than just the standard, but the standard is in there, and the standard for project management has these 3 groups of elements. So we already chatted about process groups, right? Initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. And then there are 10 knowledge areas. These are areas that have processes in them that are used to manage the project. And the labels here are pretty straightforward. So you have integration management, which is where the project manager oversees everything and coordinates things and moves the project forward from beginning until end. And there are a number of processes that belong to that knowledge area. And then there's scope, figuring out what the requirements are, creating a scope statement, and letting that scope statement drive the planning effort for cost, schedule, quality, resources, etc. And you can see that after scope, you deal with schedule, you deal with cost, you deal with quality. All of these knowledge areas have an array of processes. And in fact, there are a total of 49 processes that are part of the Standard for Project Management. And each of the 49 processes has a set of inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. And you will be tested on the exam in a definitional way on these items. Now, it goes far beyond that, so you need to know these things and the processes in order to understand how to answer the definitional questions, but you also need to know how to deal with situations. You get a lot of situational questions on the exam. And so the starting place is the standard, and then when we get into the training, we talk about the individual processes and what the inputs are and what the tools and techniques are, and those are then what empower us then to figure out how to answer the questions based on scenarios that are presented. So here's a chart that shows the 10 knowledge areas in columns. Right? You can see that, right? Integration starting on the left, then scope, schedule, cost, quality, resource management, communications management, then comes risk, procurement, and stakeholder. And then you can see that the rows are the process groups, also known as project management phases. And so you can see that each process belongs to a knowledge area as well as a process group. And so that's kind of a mapping of how the processes and process groups and knowledge areas interact. So when we do our training, we essentially do some framework stuff where we talk about the environment like we did, we talk about the life cycle, we talk about what a project manager is, what his or her role is. We talk about project management office, PMO, other things like that, kind of a framework part. We deal with that. And then we go through each of the 10 knowledge areas and we examine each of the processes, and where we think it's relevant for the exam, we spend extra time on those processes and do some extra training and some exercises to kind of make sure we've got it in our heads so that when we actually sit for the exam, we're prepared. So now let's talk about the exam itself. The exam, I know you've heard about it, that's why you're here, and that prompted some questions. Oh, I see a question here in chat. Why do the knowledge areas start with number 4? That is a great question, and I commend you, Alfredo. You are observant. The reason is because this lines up with the chapters in the PMBOK itself. So our training lines up with the PMBOK, the Guide to the Project Management Body of Knowledge. So chapter 4 in the PMBOK is integration. And so what we do is we have 3 preceding modules. We'll have an introductory module. We'll have a module about how to prepare for the exam, how to answer questions, some strategic kind of stuff. And then we have our 3rd module, which will be framework stuff. And then we go through, starting with module 4, the 10 knowledge areas. And then that way we line up with the PMBOK, which makes it a lot easier when you take our simulation exams. And if you miss a question and it's a quality question, you know that you can look things up in chapter 8 of the PMBOK, and it lines up with our module 8, so you can go back to some of our exercises, etc. Does that make sense? So that's why we do that. So thank you for that confirmation. So let's talk about the applying for the exam. So not everybody qualifies to sit for the exam, and you have to go through an application process, and you do this online at www.pmi.org. Now you can just go there and then you can navigate to the application, but you can see right there, that's the extended URL. That will take you to the beginning of the application process. Now, once you start the application process online, you don't have to finish everything at once. You can save it, you can come back and work on it some more, save it, come back. And you can come back as many times as you want until your application is ready to submit. There is a timeline on that. You have a 90-day window to complete your application. Otherwise, if that 90 days expires, you just have to start over. And that's because there are some experience and education requirements. And so they don't let an application stay open forever. Here's what we were talking about earlier before we kind of got started. If you are a member of PMI, it's $405 to sit for the exam the first time. And if you're not a member, it's $555. So just to be clear, PMI does not require you to be a member to have the PMP certification. They just create incentives for you also to be a member of PMI. And like I was mentioning earlier, it's a pretty good idea to be a member of PMI if you're going to be in project management. Now, once you complete the application and you submit it and it is approved, that's when you have to pay your money. And after you pay your money, you can then schedule your exam. Now, once the exam fee has been paid, you're going to get an email that's going to have an authorization code which allows you to schedule your exam at a Prometric testing center. So Prometric is a third party. They proctor the tests for PMI. I see your question there about what's it cost to be a member. I think I cover that in the next slide. If it's not, I'll cover it for you. So once you submit your application, it's approved, you pay for it, and then you get your eligibility code. Then there's another timeline that kicks off, and that is you have 1 year to take the exam. If you don't take it and pass it within that year, you then have to start the whole application process over. So, you know, there's no harm in that other than it just costs money. And so, you know, you want to make sure that when you go sit for the exam, you can pass it. And then it's possible that your application can be selected for audit. And the audit basically means that everything in your application has to be verified. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. If you get audited, it's not the end of the world. It's not difficult. It's just kind of a hassle. It just takes time to verify everything. And I actually know this because I've been through an audit with PMI. I have 3 PMI certifications, and on one of them, I got lucky and got to go through the audit. And so I did it fine. It just means that it takes a little bit longer to get your application approved. And because you got to get, your managers to sign off on your hours and stuff like that. So it's just a hassle. Now, also, once you have scheduled your exam, if you're within 30 days of the exam date and you have to change it, PMI is going to charge you another $70. So you want to be pretty sure that you're ready for the exam when you schedule it so that you don't have to reschedule it and even pay more money. Sometimes PMI will give waivers if there's an emergency that has come up, and they might waive that $70. But that's just something where you have to contact PMI and ask them and say, hey, this came up. Is there any way that you can waive the rescheduling fee? And let's see here. Oh, so if you get audited, you have to pay. You don't have to pay until it's approved. So your application isn't approved until after the audit, and then that's when you pay. So like on the previous slide, if your application is approved without an audit, that's when you pay. So it's when your application is approved that you need to pay the money. Now, we have suggestions. We've been at this a long time. And so this speaks to some of your questions about how you actually go through the process. Would you mind going back a slide for a second? Yes, I could do that. Which slide? This one? One more. Okay, so let's go back to this one. Is this the one? Okay, let me know when you're ready. Okay, so let's bounce through these right here. So when you do your application, we recommend that you take care and make sure your name on the application matches your photo ID. Because when you go to the Prometric Center, you have to check in and they will use your photo ID to verify that you're the right person at the right center to take the right test. And if your name on your photo ID doesn't match the application, you could actually be denied the opportunity to sit for the exam. Now, I mean, it's not going to be a huge problem if you don't spell out your middle name or something like that. They'll work through that, but just avoid it. Just make sure that when you do your application, it looks just like your photo ID and you're good. Oh, we can go back anytime you want, Alfredo. No worries. Also, for every project, you have to provide contact information for that project, like who your supervisor was. And excuse me, because if you get audited, those are the people that will be asked to validate the hours that you're claiming for your experience. And, you know, it could just create more problems if you have entered that information incorrectly. In fact, it might even be a good idea to contact those folks and just make sure that they agree that, you know, the hours that you're claiming fits into their memory or their records. And that way, if you are audited, you know, you're good to go. They just need to sign off on some papers that PMI provides. Now, if you run into any challenges, it's always good to reach out to a current PMP and ask them if they'd be willing to review your application prior to submission. We cover that in the course, so you don't need to worry about going outside of that if you end up taking our course, because we'll go through the application process in detail and we know how to avoid some of the pitfalls. Now, we do recommend that you become a member of PMI before you apply for the exam. And the pricing structure, at least as of right now, is it costs $129 a year to be a PMI member. And then there's a one-time upfront $10 application fee. So it's $139. So if you add up the member price for the exam of $405, plus 139, you can see that that's still just a few dollars less than the non-member price to sit for the exam. So you might as well join PMI for a year. I mean, if you don't like it, you don't have to re-up, but you probably will like it, and that's their gamble, right? Create an incentive to join PMI before you take the exam. Doesn't cost any more money. And then during that year, you can see what benefits PMI provides you. There's a handbook that's available at pmi.org for the PMP. And it has all the details about how you actually go about applying and scheduling your exam and all that kind of stuff. You can go there and you can get this. We cover all of this in our training, so if you don't want to deal with all of that, we take care of that for you. Now, I mentioned that you have some experience requirements in order to sit for the exam, and if there's two tracks that you choose from. If you have a bachelor's degree, oh, I'm just noticing you posted another question here. When you have a minute, can you tell us what's the benefit of being a member? The primary benefit of a member is, if you're like me, it's always about money. You save money. And they have publications, they have seminars, they have um, uh, live meetings. You know, they do conventions and things like that, and you save money if you're into going those kinds of things. Also, they will send out a monthly letter or notices about emerging trends. They have a job site, you know, so that if people are looking to hire PMPs, they can help with that. They maintain a registrar of all of their certificates. There's usually a chapter that will meet locally, and you can go to the chapter meetings and network. So things like that. It's, you know, it's a professional association kind of thing. If you've been involved in any of those, it's that same kind of thing. So resources, publications, networking, find a job assistance, staying up on trends and things like that. So when it comes to experience, if you have a bachelor's degree, you need to have 4,500 hours of project management experience. And that's like 3 years. And that all has to be acquired within the 8 years prior to your application. And then if you don't have a bachelor's degree, you need a high school diploma or some kind of equivalent. And if you go the high school route, you have to have 7,500 hours of experience. So that's like 5 years of experience. And that also has to be within the last 8 years. So I'm not sure what your situation is out there, folks, but I don't have a bachelor's degree. And so I had to go the 7,500 hour route. So, I mean, it's not that big of a deal. It's just you have to have more hours that you have to be able to document that you've been involved in project management. So it's worth just chatting about what counts as experience. So first of all, it has nothing to do with your title, but it has to do with the work that you do. So, for example, activities that you led or directed for a project will count towards your experience. So if you've determined that something needs to be done, even if it's just in a portion of the project, and or you actually helped lead a group of people to get work done, that kind of experience will be satisfactory on your application. So, an example, determining the activities required to install and test system hardware at a client's location. Right? That's executing stuff. Right? That's not, you know, creating the schedule or the budget, but that will count as hours. Or it could be being one of the leads that helps the team create the work breakdown structure for a project. Now, this, oops, let me go back. This graphic that showed up here on the right is an actual view of deliverables that were claimed for a project on a real application that was accepted. So if you look at that, you can see that what PMI wants to know is what's the objective of the project? And then they want to know what project deliverables you were involved in. And it makes sense to use PMI's lexicon. Like in the PMBOK, you read about and you learn how to do a project charter. You know about creating the communications management plan. You find out about what make or buy decisions is all about. And if you were involved in those kinds of things, this is what they're looking for. And you'll notice that this isn't even a very long list either. But this was approved. So PMI is not looking for a narrative description of your amazing contributions to the project, nor are they interested in any kind of proprietary or non-disclosable information. This is what they're looking for. So, you know, if you're going to do your application, you know, having something like this could be a good guide. Don't copy this, but this gives you a guide for that. And so when you take our course, we have this example and a couple others that can, you know, help you be clear on exactly how to complete that part of the application. And that's always the most difficult part of the application, is claiming the hours. Now, we talked about audit. You know, PMI says that they select people randomly, and I guess we have to believe them. So you really don't know whether or not your application is going to be selected for an audit, but you will as soon as you submit your application, because that's usually what happens. As soon as you push submit, you'll get an immediate response saying that you've been flagged for an audit. And then you're going to get an email that will have all the instructions about what to do for an audit. And it's also going to include some links to download some documents that will be used to validate your experience. And those documents get printed out by you, and then they're given to those primary contacts that you listed for each project. And so typically those people would be whoever your manager was at the time the experience was acquired. So that would be the contact information you would put in the application, and then that's what's included in the documents that you print out. And then you actually then give those individuals the forms, and then they complete them. They put them in an envelope and seal it. You're not supposed to see whether or not they actually sign off or not. And then they're supposed to sign over the seal on the envelope, and then they give you the envelope. And you may have to collect multiple envelopes depending on who was your manager and who, you know, how many projects you're claiming hours on. And so then you also have to document the two other areas that are part of the requirement. So we talked about experience hours. You also have to have that, you know, education, you know, the bachelor's degree or the high school diploma. And you also have to have 35 hours of dedicated project management training. And so you'll have to make photocopies of your diploma and photocopies of your training certificates. So they all add up to 35 years. 35 years, sorry, I misspoke. We're talking about 35 hours. Yeah, if the manager, the question team that's being asked is, what happens if the previous manager is no longer in the business? Then it would be somebody else who would be authorized to sign off on those hours. Sometimes businesses are gone, you know, you can't, there is nobody available. Or if you're doing something entrepreneurial, maybe you're your own manager. I guarantee you that whether the company's been closed and there's no way to get a hold of people, or whether it's yourself, PMI has already seen everything. And so what you do is you just reach out to PMI and explain, the company is closed, I have no contact information for my previous managers, and I'm wondering how you would like me to handle that on the application. And based on your description of what the scenario is, they'll tell you exactly what to do. So it's not a big deal. Those hours are not lost. And PMI will assign somebody that will like kind of have your case, will be in charge of your application, and they'll help you through that. And that happened to me. I actually had to reach out to PMI, and they assigned somebody to my application, and the individual was brilliant. He was very helpful. He walked me through different steps, and while he didn't really tell me how to complete my application, he gave me enough information so it was like, okay, I totally get it. So yeah, you just contact PMI. All of these things, the envelopes that contain the validated hours, the photocopies of your diploma and certificates, you put all of those in a big envelope and you mail that to PMI. and you have to mail it to them because there's no way to do this electronically. After they receive it, PMI says that it will take 7 to 10 business days to review the application, or the audit information rather, and determine whether or not they're going to approve your application. Now, I got to tell you that PMI takes this seriously. I was doing a training once for a very large company. There were 20 people in the class, and it was a mandated class where everybody had to get their PMP, and if they didn't, they weren't going to be able to continue with the company. And so this was even staged differently. This was set up, there was some kind of a deadline the company had. And so the way this whole training got set up was before the training started Monday morning, the application had to already have been submitted and approved, and their test had to have been scheduled for Friday. Talk about pressure, right? So there would be 4 days of training, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then sit for the exam on Friday. And so we were hired to come in and do that training under those conditions. So Monday afternoon, one of the guys in the class asked if we can talk privately. So we step out of the training room, and he says, hey, I got an email from PMI, and they rejected my application. And I said, oh, well, did they tell you why? And he said, yes. He said that it looked like there was some incorrect information about my education requirements. And I said, well, what did they say? And they said, well, I could update my application and resubmit it. And I said, so that's what you're going to do, right? And he said, yes. So Wednesday, so 2 days later, he comes up to me again and says, hey, can we chat privately? And I said, of course. So when we're away from everybody else, he says, hey, I got another email from PMI. And I said, oh, okay, so we're good to go. And he said, well, actually not. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, actually, I lied on my application about having a degree, and I don't, and they caught me.